Hello everyone, welcome to It's Biblical End Times Vlog 4, where we're going to get further into the timeline that we're in and why we're right at the end, right in the beginning of the 7th millennium, and right when Christ is about to return within the next few years. Obviously you saw the title of this video, 2023, and I came to that conclusion that year, not based off my own understanding, but through studying Daniel in the Bible, where it gives us a number of years. But I also want to prove this days years principle because there's a few places in Daniel where it utilizes it, and also in Revelation. And both of these correspond together in a way that I don't think can be mere coincidence, because every single one of them corresponds to very similar understanding. So we're going to get into it, but first I want to cover the 10 millenniums real quick again. And if you look at the events that happen in these millenniums, if you go into, say, online or into other Christian historians and stuff, where they place the dates as to where they think like the flood was, and when when Moses was around, when David was around, you find that they fall within these millenniums if you go back, and most people do in the Christian community do believe the earth was 6,000 years ago created, and that falls in line with this. So obviously the latter half of this would be the 5th, 6th, and now 7th millennium, and the previous that we've all basically we're here and this has all happened already. So let's just go over it again. So in the first millennium, the first 1,000 years was creation, the fall, and Enoch was born. The second millennium, evil reached its peak at that time, and God had to introduce the flood. Remember we talked about the Nephilim, the Watchers, the corruption of humanity, corruption of creation itself, possibly the dinosaurs created. The third millennium was the law, the Exodus, Moses himself, the 10 Commandments. And near the end of this millennium, you'll find that David was chosen as the elect root of righteousness, which means the bloodline where Christ would come through. And that's true in all the genealogies. And we know that Jesus always mentions that he's within the David's lineage there. The fourth, right here, is the fourth millennium with the prophets, the time of all the prophets, the captivity in Babylon, and then at the end of it, Jesus Christ was born, as well as John the Baptist, which we indicated there's a prophecy of that in the fourth day of creation. Fifth millennium, obviously you have the crucifixion of Christ. The church begins to be built, and within this, I do believe the Antichrist, the big capital A Antichrist, began its reign. But we'll probably get to that at a later time. It's going to be a little referenced in here because of the numbers we're going to talk about. The sixth millennium is the time of lostness, the loss of wisdom. I believe the division in the church, all the different ideas we have out there, the cults and everything, kind of explains where we are now if you really think about it. And then in the 7th millennium, right at the beginning, it seems like there's going to be the most corrupt, humankind in history that kind of reflects the days of Noah. And obviously that's when Christ is going to have to come back. We're going to have the first resurrection, which is the believers, the first resurrection, and that's our inheritance, what people would refer to as the rapture, depending on how they want to look at it. We'll talk about the rapture at another time and why it should be called the first resurrection, and then that's when the millennial kingdom is, which is very soon. Then you got the 8th millennium where Satan is released again and then crushed, and then the beginning of a new era, as the Epistle of Barnabas kind of states. And the new era is here. You got the white throne judgment in the 9th millennium, and that's the second death, technically a second resurrection of everybody, not just the believers who were resurrected here. And then also the 10th millennium, which is the new heavens and new earth, and that's when the Watchers, the ones who came down here and corrupted humanity, are finally judged, because as we know from Jude and Peter, they're bound currently, and that's a separate judgment for them. So that's the millenniums. Now, our story today about the numbers and how we are in the end times directly is all basically based on we're not going to really need to go to the Apocrypha. We're not going to need to go to the Church Fathers, even though they do discuss this. But this time we're just going to go with the canon here, the accepted canon in the 66 books. And our story is going to take place within the 4th millennium all the way to now, where we're at. And this is the millenniums right here. So I'm going to go through, as we go through the scriptures and stuff, and start putting stuff onto the board that shows you where the numbers correspond. Now, I want to prove that the numbers in the Bible correspond to years, not that they are just numbers. And that a lot of people have gotten stuck, I think, myself too, about these years, because they say when the Abomination of Desolation is set up in Daniel 12, Blessed is, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who makes it to 1,335 days. And people took that as literal, so they kind of, because it says in the Bible, no man knows the day or the hour when Christ returns, but they do admit that when the Abomination of Desolation is set up, a lot of people do believe, at least in the evangelical church, that there will be a future temple built in Jerusalem, and that eventually the Antichrist will come and he will set up some abomination in there, and then 1,335 days later, basically you would have the return of Christ. And that does kind of prove that you would know when he comes back. But I don't believe it's about days. I think the days are years, and I could prove to you, since there's already something on the Temple Mount now, that that's what it's referring to. So, in Ezekiel, he used the day to years principle in here in Ezekiel 4, starting in, let's start in verse 4, where he's talking about, this is about a judgment that's coming on Israel, but so he says in verse 4 here, as for you, talking to Ezekiel, lie down on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You shall bear their iniquity for the number of days that you lie on it. For I have assigned you a number of days corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days, 390 years. Thus you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. When you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. I have assigned it to you for 40 days, a day for each year. Okay, so that's kind of a principle that was given to him there. If you want to keep it within that box, you can, but it corresponds to something else. Now, there's something where the whole church, at least the evangelical people that talk about these, what the visions are in Daniel, they talk about this. They use this principle, but they don't extend it from this. They don't take it to the other chapters in Daniel. I don't see why not, and I think once you do, it's pretty amazing because it proves a lot of things about history that have already happened. And again, remember how it says knowledge will increase in the end? Daniel 12 says that. I think knowledge is increasing now. We can look back and see it. And maybe it wasn't for that time, maybe 10 years, 15 years ago, but now it's for us to know. So we can be ready and straighten up, and also be excited as well, and know that everything that's befallen on the earth was intended, and it's going to be for our inheritance, which will be the first resurrection in the 7th millennium. So let me find this. It's in Daniel 9, but it's the 70-week prophecy. And I'm just going to read the prophecy here and kind of what I think myself it means, but also how people can look at it. So he's given another vision here. So 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make an atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision of prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war, and desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Okay, so from that, a lot of people have said there's going to be 62 weeks, right, and the Messiah will come, and you have, there'll be 7 weeks and then 62 weeks, so from that time, that's, they changed that to, for each day in the week to represent years. And then it says there's another week here that's not necessarily mentioned. I believe it is mentioned. So it says, and after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. So after that time, and have nothing, but the people of the princes to come will destroy the sanctuary, and its end will come. But it talks about in verse 27 here, and he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. So most people put that together as to mean the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. because we know the Antichrist does away with the daily sacrifices in later verses. But this is different. This is not the daily sacrifices. This is sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. So I believe it separates them. But it talks about this midweek. He puts in the sacrifice and offering, and he confirms the covenant, right? So I believe this is Christ confirming the covenant and bringing an end to, animal sacrifice and becoming the sacrifice that we are to look to himself. But after him, on the wing of abominations, will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. So he makes it desolate when he comes until the end, when the final destruction is decreed. So that I believe that's separate. I believe the one confirming the covenant here is Christ, and I believe the separate one is the one who is on the wings of abomination. So if you go back, after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people, the prince who is to come, will destroy the sanctuary and the city. Messiah, I believe, is separate here from... Oh, there's something upstairs. Sorry, Messiah is separate from the one who comes to destroy the sanctuary. And will come with a flood, and even there will be war, desolations are determined. Okay, so this is one way to look at it. There's people that start at different points, different numbers, but they're basically saying the same thing, that the decree to rebuild the temple, the second temple for Israel, the Jewish temple, say it went out in the year 458, okay? And then you have 62 weeks plus 7 weeks, so 7 weeks would be the 49. You split that up into 49 days. The 62 weeks is put into 434. Add those together, you have 483 days, which correspond to years. And you come to potentially when Christ was baptized, which people are saying, so let's say it was in 29 AD. You know, like this chart could go this way depending on when he was actually born. But, so that would be 483 years, right? To get to that point. So he's baptized here, but Messiah, right, was cut off in the next week. So there's one more week, right? Because we're talking about 70 weeks here in this prophecy. There's one more week. So that week, say it started here, 29 AD. But remember, Messiah was cut off in the midweek, right? So say 33 AD is when he was crucified. That's 1 year we have. So that's the midweek. So 3.5 years into it, Messiah's cut off. Some people take it to where the rest of that week is fulfilled, say, at the martyrdom of Stephen, and that's another like 3.5 years. But we do have a timetable here that everyone believes that days are years. And I think it's pretty amazing because everybody's always amazed, wow, that this book of Daniel predicted when Christ would first come. And I think that's amazing too. But they never take this framework and take it to the rest of the books of Daniel, which I think is even more amazing that we have that information for sure at least 2,000 years ago when Christ came and he references the book of Daniel. So we'll go there. But this is the start, right? So 490 years. Let's say that already happened. Now, a lot of people don't like that because they believe that the Antichrist is the one who makes a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he puts a stop to the sacrifice of grain offering. But I do believe through Christ's sacrifice here, there's a few verses, he puts a stop to the offering at the temple and becomes the final offering. Because it separates it here, it says in verse 27, on the wings of abomination, after that happens, will come one who makes desolate. So I believe the one who comes to make desolate is after Christ, somewhere in here. And they're separate. And I'm going to try to prove that to you. So, do we have to concrete this as usual? So, why are we going to Daniel to find these numbers? And why is the abomination not the one we're spoken of in the book of Maccabees? Because Christ referenced, maybe that was a type and shadow of the one that would come, and there was a type of abomination that happened at the temple. But it's not the abomination of desolation that Christ refers to. So we'll go to Matthew 24, which is called the Olivet Discourse, where he talks about, they ask him about the end times. And he says, in reference to it, that starting in verse 15, he talks about other things, but nation against nation and that. But at this, in verse 15, he says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Whoever is on the house step must not go down to get the things that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant those days and nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight is not in the south. For there will be a time of great tribulation, as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until then, nor ever should be. And unless those days were cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Okay? So we have here a reference for Christ to look back at Daniel when he's talking about this abomination of desolation, and this would be something to see, and once you see it, then you know the end is near, basically. We'll go to a near in a sense, and that's also the beginning of the Great Tribulation, which I believe is longer than 7 years, because that 7-week prophecy, a lot of people will take that last 7 years and they say it's further in history, like I said, because they're connecting the two, Antichrist and what Christ does, I believe. And they're throwing this further in history because they believe the Antichrist hasn't come yet. I'm telling you, I believe it is here, and it's been here for a long time. And the Great Tribulation has been going on for 1,400 years, maybe more at this point, and it will culminate in the return of Christ. It just gets worse and worse, obviously. But we'll know that when he returns, and I'm going to make that case eventually. I don't know if I'll do that in this one as we go on, but Mark talks about this too, right? He says, so it's in verse 13. Let me see. I guess I didn't. I might do a cut here, but okay. So in verse 13 or chapter 13, verse 14. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. And those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one who is on the house step must not go down or go and get anything out of his house, and the one who is in the field must not track back. Okay, it's saying the same thing. Lest those days are short. Okay, and you could basically get the point here that when you see an abomination standing where it ought not, which is what he said, and what did Matthew say about the abomination? It was standing in the holy place. Standing in the holy place where it shouldn't be. And then Luke also talks about this in chapter 21. Let me find that. Okay, chapter 21. Okay, nation rise against nation. You got the whole thing. But he doesn't say the abomination here, but he says in verse 19 of chapter 21, but your endurance will gain you lives. Okay, and verse 20 says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize her desolation is near. Desolation, okay. The desolation is pretty much a complete destruction, or also like complete devastation of the people in an area. They're not there anymore. And in verse 24 it says they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into the nations. I believe this is talking about the literal Israel. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So it's a time of desolation that lasts until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. The time of the Gentiles, we need to know what that is. I believe that's when the temple mount is taken and under control of the Antichrist system until the time when the Jews have it back, just as a reference. Okay, so we have this. We know that basically this abomination of desolation, it's involves Jerusalem actually being surrounded by armies. It's standing where it shouldn't be, and it's in the holy place, Temple Mount. Okay, that's the physical element. There might be a spiritual element to it that I'm sure somebody else out there can also attribute, because we do have our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, so that there might be a connection there too. And I think there is, even in this physical version of it, but I think it is a physical thing that you can see. So we're going to go to Daniel. It does talk about the abomination of desolation, which is interesting. It talks about it a few times. It definitely talks about the king of the north setting it up in chapter 11. And it also says here in chapter 12 is where we get these numbers, right? So I'm going to put these numbers up on the board just to start to give us start building, right? So in chapter 12 here, it says, from the time that the regular sacrifice, so the regular sacrifice, not the grain offering, okay, not sacrifice in general like Christ, the regular sacrifice here is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. So abomination, 1,290 days. I believe the days are years, obviously, right? So there's 1,200, so it'll be abomination. But it says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting. Okay, you keep waiting until the 135 days. 1,335 days. So also 1,335 days, years. Okay? So abomination, 1,335 years later. I believe is saying that this is the end of the tribulation, and that's when Christ returns. Because it says, "But as for you, to Daniel, go your way to the end, then you will enter the rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age," at the first resurrection, right? So Daniel will be there too. And why did they tell him about these days? Okay, because I believe Daniel asked, "How long will it be until the end of these wonders?" Okay, and one told him that was dressed in fine linen, it'll be who was above. Okay, so it'll be for a time, times, and half a time, and soon finish the shattering of the. When the shattering of the holy people is finished, then these events will be completed. So the holy people are going to be persecuted until this time when Christ comes back, right? The Great Tribulation is going to last until this time, right? And obviously it's going to peak right at the end, like Enoch was saying, and then the resurrection is going to happen. And I believe this indicates that is from when the abomination is set up, there will be 1,335 years until that happens. Okay, so that's our framework. Now I want to give you one super framework that, before we get into how those numbers correspond, how the days or years, we have another ram and goat prophecy. I'm going to have to read the whole thing just to get the context of what it is, and that's going to be in chapter 8 here. So it's this vision that involves Alexander, and it involves a timeline, but for sure 100% this cannot be coincidence. And then we'll go back to this board and start putting things on there. But Daniel gets his vision, and he says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to one which appeared to me previously. And I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulal canal. Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased and magnified himself. While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram, who had 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram, shattering the 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no rescue for the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. But as soon as he was mighty, and large horn was broken, and in his place came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. This is what people believe is the Antichrist system. The Antichrist, I believe that is true as well. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the stars to fall on the earth, and it trampled them down, connecting this horn also to Satan, who led the angels down in another rebellion, besides not the one the Watchers are referring to in the 2nd millennium. This is Satan. It even magnified this horn itself, equal to the commander of the host, and removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. The Abomination of Desolation was done by this horn, because he took away the regular sacrifice. Just cutting to the chase, I believe the regular sacrifice is taking away Christ's sacrifice, the true sacrifice, because Christ did away with what? The animal sacrifices, the grain offering, but he did not do away with sacrifice technically, because he is the actual sacrifice that we are to look to for the atonement for sins. On account of this transgression, the host will be given over to the horn and the regular sacrifice, and it will be flung truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. It will be successful, obviously overcoming the saints in the Great Tribulation. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said, in the particular one who was speaking, "How long will this vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror," the abomination, "so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled?" He said, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored." Okay, so this references 2,300 years. So, not beginning with the abomination, but beginning from when the goat comes against the ram, right? So this, and then 2,300 years, right? Because if it's years later, then the will be restored. The holy place will be properly restored. So the holy place, the Abomination of Desolation, is going to be there for these many years. We need some more numbers, but the vision here is interpreted, okay, in verse, ask the angel, and it definitely tells you what this is concerning, basically. It gives you, this is really amazing. So it came near, I understand, okay. He identifies the ram which you saw with the two horns in the beginning there was the kings of Media and Persia. Remember, it has two horns. Okay, the kings, the Media and Persia. So Persia, the empire of Medo-Persia. The shaggy goat, the goat represents the kingdom of Greece. The large horn between his eyes was his first king. Okay, Alexander, right? He came against the Medo-Persians and he overcame them, right? And that's true. And he's the horn. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise out of the nation, although not with its power. That's true, because when Alexander died, his empire split into four. You have the Potomac, you have the Seleucid, and then you have two others for sure. I'll put them up on the screen. That was true. That happened, and that was historical fact. There's even a story where when Alexander entered Jerusalem, when he was conquering Persia, Persian Empire, they showed him this prophecy in relation to him. You have to find that yourself online, but that is true. So it was split into four, right? The four different kingdoms, that's true. In the latter period of their rule, the four kingdoms, when transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, okay? Insolent, skilled in intrigue. Okay, his power will be mighty. So out of one of these four kingdoms comes forth this one king, okay? Insolent, skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. His power is of Satan, right? I believe this empire, this system is of Satan, okay? That's the Antichrist system, right? The empire that comes. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. And he will destroy mighty men and the holy people through the Great Tribulation, right? He is given power, the Antichrist, over the system. We'll get into the beast later, because we know the beast in Revelation 13 is the same beast, because he is given power of the sword over the holy people as well. He causes deceit to succeed over influence, and he will magnify himself in his heart and destroy many while they are at ease, okay? But he will be broken without human agency, and the vision and the evening and the warnings, which has been told is true. But keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future, okay? This whole vision talks about the future thing, right? So the future, even to Daniel, was Alexander, the goat, coming, attacking Persia, and then leading. What happens within that, though? Which is everything, right? The abomination. We have the Empire of Greece coming, being split into four, and then out of it the Antichrist nation rising out of one of the regions, right? I believe it's the Seleucid region, but we need to get into that later, because what's important now is to know that this vision cannot be fake, because it returns to 2,300 years, right? So when did Alexander attack Persia, right? So let's put it on there, okay? 334 BC, the goat. So we'll just put Alexander. Okay, so right here you go. 334 BC, right? Alexander attacks Persia, okay? Okay, so within history, we're going to go all the way to the 6th millennium, right? The time of lawlessness, all right? And it's 2,300 years later. And what happens within this time, right? So 2,300 years. Well, the Antichrist is supposed to be rise, right? The empire out of one of the four nations of Greece. And the abomination is going to be set up. The regular sacrifice is done away with. And but also at the end of this, the Temple Mount, it's restored. The holy place is restored to its rightful heirs, I believe. So what happens 2,300 years after Alexander? Oh, some plumbing. Just ignore it. What do we have? Exactly the year that the Jews took back the Temple Mount. 1967. 2,300 years after Alexander came against, right after the goat came against the ram and destroyed them. The It was split into four after Alexander died, the empires, and out of that came the Antichrist system and the beast. And they created the Abomination of Desolation, which is on the Holy Temple Mount, and that was taken back, the Temple Mount, by the Jews from Islam, the Islamic rule, in 1967. Now, there's still the Abomination of Desolation set up on the Temple Mount. I believe it's clearly a Dome of the Rock, and that Islam is clearly the Antichrist system and beast system, for sure. But there's many Antichrists, right? We're even facing an Antichrist system now. Anybody who denies the Father and the Son, devil can go through. He doesn't have to just use one Antichrist system. But this is the big daddy, capital A Antichrist system, Islam, okay? We'll need to know that information because it happened within here. I'm not going to get into it here, but how is Islam the king of the north if it came from Saudi Arabia? In a later video, maybe the next one, I will confirm to you that Islam did not originate in Saudi Arabia, but it originated in the Seleucid Empire of the one of the four Greek empires, right? The Seleucid Kingdom of the Greek in the time of the Byzantine Empire, which was still Rome at the time, because Rome is basically a carbon copy of Greece, right? It's just an extension of it. So this whole thing can involve Rome as well, but it's about regions. It's about Antichrist systems. But this right here, this has to be true. 2,300 years later, happens to be 1967 from when it's referring to the ram and the goat, 100% prophetic right here. I think this is true. This has to be true. Now, the reason, if you were to just do a straight 334 plus 2,300 years, you'd get to a 1 year off. But the reason it's exactly 1967 is because when you do a calculation from BC to AD, there is no 0 year, so you have to minus 1, in which you get exactly this date. So it's 100% solid. Look it up. It's true. There's no, and you don't see this a lot, but why would somebody not want to know this, and know that this prophecy is true and that their God is 100% true? I don't think it's a purposeful thing. I think it's just not thinking, and I think we're right at the end, so we can look back. Okay, this is 100% true. That's amazing, right? That's true. That alone is enough to believe, in my opinion, logically. There's more to belief than just logically, and I can understand that, but that is incredible that can be true. So that's accurate. So we know the days are years, right? So we have these numbers, right? So, but what are we missing right here? When was the Abomination of Desolation? Well, according to the 70-week prophecy, right, it comes after the Messiah is cut off from another one. One will come on the wings of abomination, right? Obviously, I'm indicating Islam was that, right? Islam, Satan through Islam, Allah, whatever it is, not just the man, Muhammad. That might have also been a lying sign and wonder itself. So, what do we need? We need some more numbers, right? So, I believe their other numbers are in Revelation, the day of the year principle as well. And I believe it's to the two witnesses. Now, I believe the two witnesses have to be the church and literal Israel. Essentially, the two testaments towards the truth, right? The two peoples, right? You had, it calls them the two olive trees, calls them the two lampstands, right? We know lampstands from Revelation are churches, at least, right? And then with the two olive trees, in reference to olive trees in Romans 11, right? Paul talks about us being a wild olive tree, but we're grafted into the natural olive tree in Jerusalem. And it does say that the Jews, even though now they have turned away from Christ so that the Gentiles may experience him, they will again, in the end, be forgiven, and he will come back. And his promises are 100% because he always promises that in the end he's going to turn his face back towards his people, right? And I still think they're in unbelief, and even when he comes back, they're going to be in unbelief. But when they mourn for the one they pierced, and the Jews now, a lot of people give them a hard time still, even after the Holocaust, because they think they're wicked people. They've rejected Christ. But the Jews, now, the serious ones, are still looking forward to the Messiah, right? And they're going to realize that Jesus was that Messiah when he comes back. This is amazing grace, and I believe he's going to fulfill it. I don't know to what degree and how, but it does seem like that is an indication here. Because even in Ezekiel 38 and 39, where it talks about God coming down at the end, which I believe is the final Islamic invasion that happens at the end times, those people are in unbelief, and then again, they're not going to be unbelief again because, all this that happened. But they are clearly in unbelief in that passage, but when he comes back. But the two witnesses, right, we're going to need the new numbers to find out when the Abomination of Desolation was, right? So the two witnesses, chapter 11 of Revelation. Then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship it. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread it underfoot, the holy city, for 42 months." 42 months. Okay, so Abomination of Desolation, I believe this is what it's referring to. 42 months. We'll have to do a conversion there, right, to get years and days. But then if you go down to verse 3 here, it says, "And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth." These are the 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands, okay, the church in Israel under the Great Tribulation, I believe, because they are clothed in sackcloth, they are mourning, all right? Now, a lot of people believe these 2 witnesses, Elijah or Moses, or Elijah and Enoch. I don't believe they could possibly be just 2 people, because this is not a literal book. This is about things that literally happen. It's also spiritual. There's also so many layers to Scripture. There's so many people who know how to look at it in so many different ways. But it is 2 testaments, right? 2 people groups, because you have this false prophet later in Revelation, which I believe is Islam, which is a false testament, a false people, a false God under the guise of the Antichrist through Allah. But I mean, I could prove that 100% too, but I'd probably do that next time. But just know that the Abomination of Desolation is set up by Islam, which is the false prophet, false beast system. It's an empire, it's a religion, it's a whole thing. And how else would you describe it besides using beasts and all these kind of horns and all this kind of stuff? But that doesn't mean that we're not going to face something here in America. It's just that Islam is a part of the Antichrist system. It was the big daddy Antichrist for history. It's coming back now as an empire, but in the West we're going to face something else at the same time. And we're going to prove that eventually. But we got these 2 witnesses, right? It's the church in Israel. And how long do they prophesy? In mourning, 1,260 years, okay? When did it start? I believe it started here, because it's talking about the Temple Mount again. 1,260 years later, after the Abomination of Desolation is set up. Boom. And also 42 months. That refers to Temple Mount, right? The Gentiles, the nations are given that for 42 months. So that takes place. We know that this is going to be after Christ, as far as the vision, because John got it when? He got it after this, right? Many years after Alexander was already dead and gone, and the empire split into 4. He was under the Roman Empire at the time, okay? So it doesn't start here. It starts here when the abomination happened, which is after Christ, okay? That's when this timeline starts. And now, I just want to talk about the woman, Israel. Here, I believe the woman in chapter 12 is the woman, all right? And what does it say about her? It says, "She gives birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule the nations with an iron rod." This is in verse 5. "And her child was caught up to God by his throne." So Israel, through the lineage of David, gave birth to a son, a male child, who's Christ, the incarnation of the Word. And he's going to rule the nations with the iron rod at his coming, right? And her child was caught up to meet God at his throne. That's where Christ is, right? Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she would be nursed there for 1,260 days. Same number here, don't need to add it. That's talking about Israel, right? She goes into the wilderness, right? Because the abomination is set up. Okay, and it's just for a reference, just to give you an idea that this has to be true. There's war, there's a few things, but in verse talks about people that are overcome the lamb, or overcome the blood, using the blood of the lamb, because the devil's trying to kill them throughout history, through the Great Tribulation, right? Through all the persecutions that happen until Christ returns, which is going to happen now, and it's still happening today. Okay, so, and it says that in verse 13, the dragon saw the devil, that he was thrown down to the earth. He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, right? So he persecuted Israel. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she would fly into the wilderness in her place to be nourished for times and half a time from the presence of the serpent, okay? And the serpent poured water out like a river out of his mouth after a woman. It's a flood. So that she might cause her to be swept away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon had poured out of its mouth. So the earth helps Israel. The nations help Israel at some point when this flood comes after Israel, right? And I think that's connected with why this number is in here, okay? The Abomination of Desolation. All right, so cut to the chase. if Islam is the Antichrist faith, and it's the little horn that somehow has Satan as its leader, but is also in link to the person, right, speaking blasphemies. This is multi-layered, right? So this is like a huge thing. It's a empire, and it's a religion. It's a whole false system, right? It doesn't have. It's not just going to be some one guy for like final 7 years, because what is the most popular religion in the world, right? Islam, right, and Christianity, right? And for how long? For basically 1,400 years, you've been dealing with the Antichrist and Christianity at the same time. So the Great Tribulation has been going on for a very long period of time, right? 1,400 years, maybe a little more. And we'll explain that later, but we have to think spiritually about what this is. Not just like, okay, there's going to be a man, it has to be in the final 7 years. I think we're looking at a wrong framework here. But let's talk about the abomination. What Temple Mount? What's standing there? What's a affront to God? You got the Dome of the Rock, right? There's an inscription on the Dome of the Rock that denies Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That is abomination. That is Antichrist, because John talks about Antichrist being anyone who denies the Father and the Son. Islam does that to a great degree. And Islam is a religion of Satan. It is the empire. It was an empire for a long time, and it took over from the Seleucid region, which we'll get into another time. But on the Temple Mount, you have the Dome of the Rock, right? Set up, right? It began its construction in 688 AD. On Wikipedia, I'll put a little link right there. One of the Islamic scholars believe it was started in 688 AD and completed in, it was the year, so was it 691 AD, 692, around there. So that's when it was completed. But its construction began in 688 AD. So the abomination was started to be set up in 688 AD. Okay. Okay. So 1,200, we'll start at the bottom here. 1,260 years later. Let's just do it on the board right here, okay? So, within the 5th millennium, the Antichrist came too. Halfway through, or a little more than halfway through. And it was developed. And we'll say it's set up in I'll go over here. 688 Abomination. Abomination is... darn it! Okay, that's okay. Abomination is set up right here, right in 688 AD. Right here, boom. Okay, and then what do we need, right? At least to start with. 1,260 years, right? Later is when? When the woman had the flood come after her, right? And when the world helped that woman, when the earth helped the woman, and gave the woman, Israel, her home. 1948. In 1948, is 1,260 years after the abomination was set up. That's Israel, was its birth, right? The birth of Israel. And only after Nazi Germany unleashed a flood to finally snuff out the woman, which was Israel. The bloodline of Christ, right? Can't make this stuff up. Now, 42 months, what is that? Well, that's, and it's referenced here, right? What happens there for the 42 months? The holy city is underfoot for 42 months. They tread under the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. What, Jerusalem? And if it's in relation to the Temple Mount, it's amazing here what this is, but I have it written down here. But you have to convert it, right? So 42 months. So you break that down, that's 3.5 years, right? So you break 3.5 years down into days, right? And if you break it down, because a year is 365.25 days long, according to the Greek calendar, or it was the Roman calendar or whatever at the time when this stuff was written, you have a 365.25 day year times 3, right? 3 years plus another half a year, you come to 1,278.37 days, right? 42 months is 1,278.37 days. Convert that to years, 1,278 years, okay? When did Jerusalem take back the Temple Mount? When was the holy place restored to the rightful heirs, the rightful people? In 1967. 1967 minus 1,278.37 years is at 688.63. So just take it from where it was already coming from with Alexander. 1,278.63 years ago, the Abomination of Desolation was set up. I would go for, I don't know 100%, but this right here might even be, if you were to calculate what month, might be when it was actually began its construction. Because I don't think there's a historical document that says that, but that's pretty incredible. So, those two numbers, right, correspond 100% to this Abomination of Desolation. They reference the same time frame that Daniel was talking about. Because this all happens within Daniel's timeline, right? But it culminates in the Jews took back the Temple Mount right here. That right there is incredible. It takes a little calculating, but if you could get to that without doing much work, why not? Why is that not true? And if also this is true, even after the flood came out, the devil released Nazi Germany, and the world helped it only after what? Israel was in the wilderness, clothed in sackcloth for 1,260 years. Wilderness is the world, right? Where were the Jews found before they were again restored? They were all over Europe, right? They were all over Russia. They were all over different parts of the world, and they eventually came to Israel for their new home. That's pretty true, right? So what do we have? So Israel still has something to play, just like the Bible says. Israel is part of the elect in some way. So are the true Christians are part of the elect. And he's going to come for us. And he was going to forgive them. They're, like I said, they're in unbelief. We'll probably do a whole video proving that from here, proving that from here, proving that from there, why they have to be in unbelief when he does come back. Because it's going to be a time of grace. Now, what are we missing, right? Why do we believe that 2023 is possibly when Christ returns? Well, we have these two numbers left, right? So, and then when did they start? From the Abomination of Desolation, 688 AD. Okay, so boom, I'm going to have to cut through here from this, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to go to, 1,290 years later. So when do we find that? Now, there's other people out there who know how to calculate from, because Daniel says when the daily sacrifice, time of the sacrifice was taken away, so they take that as daily sacrifice. They go from that number to, so 1,290 years after that number, they come to 688 AD. I'm not saying that's not true. That's amazing. That's true. That also corresponds to when this happens. But I believe, just from simply reading it, that this is referring to after, for now. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying they're both potentially right, which is incredible. So we'll go 1,290 years later, and you come to 1978. Now, I thought that was kind of a fluke when I first heard it because it seemed random, but that does happen to be the year that Israel and Egypt had that peace, the Camp David peace accords, and they are still have an alliance, right? Israel and Jerusalem. Why is that significant? It's significant because Daniel 11 talks about the king of the north coming against the king of the south in the end. And the king of the south, it's all in reference to those four kingdoms again, right? The two, but specifically the Potomac in the south, which is Egypt area, and the Seleucid, okay, in the north. And obviously, I'm telling you, Islam is coming out of the north, and Islam is already restored to the north in its power before through the Ottoman Empire, and that's what's going to come back at the end is Ottoman resurgence coming against Egypt first, and then Israel itself. That's just going to happen in a few years here, and that's already gearing up. But when is that supposed to happen? I'm going to show you that right now. But basically, the significance is that Israel has a peace with the king of the south right now, Egypt. And that happened in 1978, probably beginning this whole timeline that we're on. But blessed is he who makes it to win 1,335 years later. And when is that? Well, that's 2023, isn't it? So I'm just going to extend off my branch here and come to this, 2023. Okay, that's 1,335 years, right? $1,335 years after the Abomination of Desolation was set up is the year 2023. Was a year and a half from now, or a year and a couple days from now, 2023. what has to happen in that time frame? Obviously a lot, right? We need the invasion of Israel and the attack on Egypt to happen. That's in Daniel 11, but it's also in Ezekiel 38. And I believe that's going to happen, obviously, because this timeline is so amazing. How is this not true? Is there anybody who can out there can refute this? Why this couldn't be a possibility? But honestly, you have to look at it like, I mean, just talking though, like, would you be willing to actually look at this? And you have to question obviously the 7-year tribulation timeline that we have, and the nature of the Antichrist being just a one man who rules at the end of those 7 years. In a man with, and he has to set up a literal false prophet, not the false prophet just being another false testimony, false people group, false church type thing. That's massive, right? Because it has a beast empire. And Islam itself, what does the false prophet do? If say the false prophet is Islam, I believe Islam began in the Seleucid region, right? And I can prove that. I'm going to prove that next time. But basically, that the faith itself is a fraudulent thing that was created later, and thus it came from the south, changed its origin to the south. For reasons which we'll get into later about, it has to do with the Abbasid Umayyad civil war thing that happened. But basically, that religion is ruling, and what does the false prophet do? The false religion, it set up an image, right, which is probably the Kaaba, which is in Islam right now. Everywhere in the world, Muslims pray towards a black stone, okay, all around the world, and they're all facing that image. When it speaks, how many times a day? 5 times a day. They're in the Mezzine prayer, right? 5 times a day. The image speaks, and it was set up. And what happens if you don't worship the image and get the mark of the beast? You're beheaded, right? Okay, so you're beheaded for not worshiping the false image that calls to you 5 times a day. You can be beheaded, and you have been throughout history, and there's no hiding that, right? The beheading being a major part of that faith when it's in its power, when it's in its literal stage, and it's not being reformed. That has to be true. So, and then what is the mark of the beast? I believe it's related to Shahada. They wear it on their forehead because if you look at the Greek, it kind of does look like Islamic writings, and it says whoever can understand what is it. I don't think John knew exactly what it was he was looking at. But it's also related to the fact that if you do believe in Islam, you do believe that, the sacrifice, there's no need for sacrifice, right? And Jesus never died for our sins, okay? So the sacrifice is done away with in Islam. Now, Jesus did away with what? The animal sacrifice, the grain offerings and stuff, is because he is the atonement for sins. But the Antichrist does away with the need for atonement altogether, right? The, what does it call it? Is it the daily sacrifice? I mean, that could be or says it the regular sacrifice, at least in this NASB. So he does away with the need for sacrifice. That's what Islam did. That's what the devil's doing through that. Now, at the end, what are we facing here? What is the infusion? Okay, I think it's in relation to it. We'll get into that too, in the fact that you won't be able to buy or sell without it. You weren't allowed to buy or sell. You became a dhimmi under the Islamic empires, right? Much more brutal than history is allowing us to believe. But so that's in relation to that for sure. But what is this thing? The devil is still trying to get his tentacles out there, right, through his new beast systems, right? So we have Islam still, which is the main daddy Antichrist, but there's other Antichrists. And at the end, there's a 2-pronged attack referenced in Daniel 2, which talks about the statue and the different level of metals, the legs being iron. I believe that's clearly Islam. The empires, but at the end, what does Christ destroy? He destroys an empire that is iron and clay. So it's partially strong, partially fragile. It doesn't adhere to itself. So you have 2 things at the same time. I believe that's Islam as iron, and the clay part is what we're facing with the medical tyranny and anything in the West, because it is returning to Sodom. So it's connected with this whore of Babylon, which is also connected to Saudi Arabia and the Egyptian part, the paganism that came out of there. But it's probably more than that. The great city is probably not just Saudi Arabia. It's probably all the cities around the world that are promoting Sodom and the medical tyranny and all this stuff. So there's some 2-pronged attack at the end that we're facing right now. We'll get into that later, but this is what I want to show you. Why 2023 is highly likely for the return of Christ. No man knows the day or the hour, but the church in Revelation that does, they're warned that they will. Let me find that church. Is it Thyatira or is it Okay, so the message to Sardis, they're basically the message of Sardis, the church, what does Christ say to them? He who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars says, this is in chapter 3, I know your deeds, that you have the name, you have a name that you are alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen the things which remain, which were about to die. For I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of God, my God. So remember that you have received and heard, and keep it, and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know the hour I will come to you. But you have a few people at Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will be with me in white, and they are worthy. He who overcomes will be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life, and will confess him before my holy Father and the angels. So, because they did not wake up, they did not know when he's coming. But we are waking up, right? And we probably know when he's coming. I think so. But I don't know when he's coming here. But when you start seeing Turkey coming down and attacking Egypt, the king of the south, and Israel, and trying to take that stuff, I'm pretty sure he's going to come. Because that's what, everything's lined up. This has to be true. Is there anybody who can refute this necessarily? It's not from my own doing, right? There's other people coming to these same numbers, right? And like I said, there's even somebody who knows to take this number 1,290 years back from another time that's referenced here. So the day of the sacrifice to here, 1,290 years might even be referencing this. And then if you take it this way, but it's all about this this history, this broad history, right? So we already knew history, right? Maybe we lost some information through the books and through just just not really seeking, and kind of these other doctrines that came in. I'm not saying they're terrible. It's just, they gave us kind of a framework to understand these things, but now as things come, and we're not looking for the rapture, right? We're looking for the second, the first resurrection, right? That's what we're looking for. So that's a teaching that was kind of, you could say twisted, or allowed to be twisted, or just being maybe ignorant and not knowing. So, but now we can look back and sharpen the iron, right? Sharpen ourselves. So, it's just a longer period of time, right? God, we had the 10 millenniums, right? We have all this stuff, these millenniums, but then even within this, right, this period of time, it's all right here, as described. So, he gave us all the knowledge of this stuff, and he gave us these numbers. Do you think these numbers are in here for no reason? Clearly they have utility, and clearly they correspond with things that are in reference to the actual literal verses. The real big indicator here is this right here, Alexander, 334 BC, 2,300 years later is 1967, fulfilling exactly what it's talking about happening, the Abomination of Desolation being set up, the regular sacrifice being taken away, Christ, and the people given to this little horn, this Antichrist system, this empire, the Great Tribulation, which is the persecution of Christians and Jews until obviously 1948, but even, it doesn't stop until Christ returns, right? So, but the real heirs of the Temple Mount do have the Temple Mount back in 1967. All these correspond. You don't really even have to do much calculating. Anybody can really calculate this. So days are years, and this is probably 100% true. I can't really see any other way, really. Unless, this right here, I think you can shift depending on when Christ was crucified. If it's at 33 AD, if it's not, it just depends, but I believe it's all fulfilled there. But most scholars, most people in the church believe that that's true, but they don't use the day to years principle here. And I'm not sure why not, because it proves their God is true. And Jesus is the Christ. There's nothing else you can get from it, and there's no negatives from knowing that, other than being afraid of not knowing the day or the year, or the day or the hour. But we know this year, and it does correspond with other things. And even 1978 being that involving the book of Daniel again, because it's when Israel made its pact with the king of the south, Egypt. And Daniel's all about the north and the northern kingdom fighting the southern kingdom. So, I don't know if there's any other way to see this. If somebody can show me another way in another year. I know there's some... that book. Maybe that's the indicator. Maybe there is somebody out there who can show why this is wrong. And I think even the Jubilees, there's somebody out there, somebody just sent me something, that the Jubilees correspond to at least 2022. That's pretty darn close, That's 1 year difference. So there probably is something significant to that, being that it's only 1 year apart from this, and this probably leads up to this because Daniel has this number. So they're just one day off from this. So that's probably, there's something probably true in the Jubilees too to find this, and so we'll have to sharpen each other. But as this happens, right? So we're 1.5 years away from this year. So I don't know when it happens within this year, because we're going to see Turkey come down against Israel and Egypt that within either from here till then or within this year. Because if you look up 2023 on YouTube right now, look how many videos of Turkey come up. They're usually in the Turkish language, but Turkey has its plan to revitalize the Roman Empire by 2023. And that's just, look up 2023 on YouTube and you'll see a bunch of stuff about Turkey and how Erdogan's going to, revitalize the Roman Empire. I believe Erdogan is probably Gog from the Gog Magog, the big invasion in Ezekiel 38. Now there's a Gog Magog reference in Revelation about that is in reference to when Satan's released again, but it uses it different. Gog and Magog as it seems like it's using the reference to the whole world right there. But the Gog, Magog, and the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal in there is definitely in relation to Turkey and in Ezekiel 38. So that's what we're looking for. That's the next thing that's going to happen. But in between that time, which we're going to get to next time, is how this beast at the end that we're facing is a global thing. Because what happens to the two prophets, Israel and the church, right? They are, the beast that comes after them is the beast that comes out of the abyss, which I believe is the one we're facing at the end here. Because the first beast of Revelation is out of the earth, right? And or is it it's out of the sea, and then the second one is out of the earth, right? So that's earthly teaching, that's Islam. So the second beast was Islam, the faith. The first beast was Islam, the empire. Working together, and that lasts for 42 months, which is another time. I haven't calculated 100% where that's at, but 42 months, I told you, was 1,278.37 years, and that's basically how long the first Islamic thing lasted from all the different, you got the Abbasid, the Umayyad Abbasid, and the Ottomans, and that's probably 1,278 years to when it crumbled, and 1923 became a secular state. But apparently it's going to come back very soon. So basically, I think I've been rambling here. And I was going to tell you right here that two witnesses in the end, the final beast that comes after them is the one that comes out of the abyss, so it rises at the end, which I think is partially Ottoman, partially whatever we're facing in the West. And it says, when they finish their testimony, the two witnesses, the church and Israel, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is mystically called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the peoples of the tribes of tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and they will not permit their dead bodies to be laid into a tomb. 3.5 days, I believe, is probably 3.5 years, and I think that started in 2020. And because this great city, right? We have the great city is the Whore of Babylon as well, right? So that's a negative, but this great city, mystically called Sodom and Egypt, is probably in reference to that as well. What I believe that this means is wherever you find Sodom in control, and Egypt, which is paganism, Sodom is the sexual immorality, there it says where their Lord was crucified. Basically, in Hebrews it talks about we have no continual city because Christ was crucified outside the gates. So we will be criminals wherever you find Sodom and Egypt in control in a spiritual sense, and that's definitely happening here. So we're going to be persecuted, treated as criminals, and they declared war on us, they overcame us, and then they're going to kill us. And that's probably already happening. And they're not going to let our dead bodies be laid into tombs, not to let our physical bodies be probably into any churches or we're not going to have anywhere to rest until he comes back, because that beast is out now. And that two-pronged attack, like I was saying, from Islam and from medical tyranny, whatever the Western Sodom, whatever this thing, liberal thing, I'm not sure what to call it. But basically that's happening, and we'll get into that next time as to what beast we're facing now, why Islam is 100% the beast in Revelation 13, the fourth beast of Daniel, and very least the iron legs of Daniel 2, chapter 2, and the king of the north, and the little horn, and in reference to the false prophet. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully that kind of narrows down why 2023 is most likely when Christ returns. What time during that year, I'm not sure, but I gave a good framework, and I would welcome to anybody, honestly, who wants to look at these numbers, calculate them, and say they are not corresponding to this year at some point. I don't know, does anybody else have anything for 1,335 besides this right here being the actual number when the abomination began its construction? Maybe they think it's when it was built, which is in 691 or 692, but I think it's when it began its construction, because look at all this. 1948, 1967, 1978, 2023. I think God is trying to tell us he's coming back very soon. What happens in these next 2 years leading up to this year and a half, it has to be bad. I mean, physical, on a physical sense. It has to be very hard, because when the time, what does it say in Daniel? When the holy people have been completely shattered, then the end will be. And that's a physical sense. And then what happens? It flips. We rise in the first resurrection, and the millennial kingdom reigns, and we reign with Christ for 1,000 years, and are with him forever. So, thank you guys for watching. Beasts and false prophets and the current beast we are under, the next video.